My boss was the stubborn types, so hard-headed that he would prefer to trip over his own shoelaces before taking your advice that his shoes were untied last year. When I asked him why the hell he kept this place open after dark, he shot back in anger. We've got a corner on the market out there, dummy, look around, there ain't nothing else. People will pay whatever it takes for gasoline if it means that they don't get stranded way out there. And that I couldn't deny, but that's about the only thing he would be right about, and the most financially irresponsible of people would know too. Shut his place down after dark. I recall one night a few months ago where I sat for 6 hours without a single person entering the store. By my count, my boss would have to charge $1,000 a gallon for gas to ever turn a profit. Stubborn man who makes up for the lack of business by paying men next to nothing and keeping the place in terrible condition. It didn't take much sense to rationalize why. Number one stop in the middle of nowhere for expired snacks and overpriced gasoline wasn't getting much visitors. Like it or not, it was the only feasible job for me at this point in my life. I was a student and needed a place to work graveyard shifts so that I could attend school in the daytime. When I first joined the Quick Stop about a year and a half ago, it was a living hell. He was just so bored that I couldn't stand it. Always had problems staving off boredom. But the monotony of this place could drive even a monk up the wall. After a while, though, I got smart and realized that I could use this time to complete homework, catch up on my favorite podcast, or do whatever creative time-killing project I had conjured up the night before. I didn't have coworkers or my boss presents, so it was actually kind of a sweet setup. Some nights tonight, though, wasn't one of those nights, and neglected to download my favorite podcast before I came out, and I was all caught up with homework since the beginning of last week, with absolutely no customers over the last 3 hours. I was beginning to fear that I was going to experience yet another lonely 6 hours stretch, like I had a few months ago, this time in even worse conditions, because that night a few months ago, I had at least a movie or two to watch, and tonight I had nothing. I cursed myself aloud over and over again for being so foolish. How on earth could I forget to bring something to entertain myself with? I mean, I hated to beat myself up like this, but there just wasn't anything else to do. Another 50 minutes crawled by until finally somebody came into the gas station. Immediately upon entering, the tall, well-dressed man walked to the farthest corner of the store. Nothing uncommon. People frequently stopped at the freezers in the back to grab a beer on their way, and he always used to joke to myself, geez, people need a drink as soon as they set foot in this. I let out a silent chuckle as a nod to yet another case proven theory. When the novelty of that wore off, it shifted my attention from the joke back to the customer times. While overcome by boredom, it made a game out of developing a profile of the visitors. And this guy was no exception, knowing that his stop would be brief. I got to work, white guy, well-dressed, prescription glasses, quite skinny. The word intellectual came to mind, a bit antisocial, but quite interesting to speak with once you overcome the wall that had put Super. Can't blame him, had probably got bullied as a kid. The skinny frame, the glasses, and his perfectly maintained appearance were among the most common targets for bullies. You look to be a wealthy guy though, so what's he doing in a hole like this? She just needs chips and beer. He's going to a late night party, guys, maybe even to a little fantasy baseball. His friends told him to beat 9:30, and now it's 10:07 and he's running late. This crappy place was on the way, so he just said screw it and pulled over. And not too long he would arrive at this friend's and have a real nice time. Hell, I was happy for him. I wish I could leave work and go with him. At this point, I was rambling. I'd reached the end of my rope. He was fresh out of the Ories on this guy's life. Usually a customer comes to their senses and runs out of this place before I can complete a full analysis on them. Why was this guy taking so long to choose a beer? Now, our selection of beer wasn't huge, but I've never seen anybody stand absolutely clueless in front of the freezer for a full 5 minutes before. Hey, men, you looking for some kind of craft beer or something? I asked playfully. 'Cause I gotta tell you, my boss is a pretty cheap ass. You ain't gonna find nothing special. Vanishing completely. The man hadn't said a word, let out a chuckle, or turned his head in the slightest. I stood in silence with my eyes fixated on the statue of a man for what seemed like an eternity, standing with his back facing towards me. Only further dehumanized the man, as I couldn't see any of his facial features. Oh my God, I've been dreading. I thought the odds that you will ever experience a convenience store robbery aren't great. But for some reason, I always thought one day it would happen to me. Looks like today's the day. Then I said to myself silently, it all made sense. Now his dodgy behavior, lack of communication, and lost demeanor while selecting his beer hadn't even appeared to be looking around at 10 different beers. She just kept this head stationary directly in front of him. This guy was clearly doing some heavy mental processing, probably once again weighing out the pros and cons before finally deciding to psych himself up and rob the place. My only hope was that he would make it quick and get the hell out of here. It was becoming increasingly bothered by his ominous presence. The level of negligence was terrifying without even a small glimpse at his facial features that have a slight indication of his motivations or plans with his back turned toward Melik. He was a completely different being than the relatively pleasant person who had walked in. A full 10 minutes had passed since the guy entered the store, and for the entire duration of his stay, he has stood completely motionless. And in my shock, I joined in with him and broke the stillness with a careful reach into my pocket. I retrieved my cell phone and dialed 911, slowly crept the phone up to my ear and attempted to prepare a somewhat accurate statement that would describe to their respondent the way that this creepy man was making me feel. A jump as my phone let out a loud beep. No signal. My eyes shot up to the man in front of the freezer. He hadn't moved an inch. I gave a silent sigh of relief that the man hadn't appeared to have noticed. Trying to remain calm, I dialed 911 again and placed the phone to my ear again. My phone screamed and I returned it to my pocket. I was beginning to panic since my crappy phone wasn't working. He was now going to have to place the call on the store phone. It was on. Lie a couple off feet away, but even pulling a phone out of your pocket is incredibly difficult to do when you're frozen by fear. It threw my mind into an incredible focused state, acknowledging that if I didn't muster up the courage to walk over to the landline, I could find myself in serious danger. I took in a quiet, deep breath and began to tiptoe my way to the phone, refusing to break contact with the figure. My slow footsteps eventually arrived at the base of the counter that held the phone. I picked up the receiver and punched in the numbers, and the man remained static. 911, what's your emergency? Said the woman. Hey, I'm a clerk over at the Quick Stop on Lansing, just off the freeway. There's a guy here, and he's just staring at the freezer. It tried talking to him, and he won't respond. He's not moving or anything. I replied, do you think he needs some medical attention? The woman inquired confusedly. I don't think so. I mean, he's standing on his own. Look, I hate to call in like this. Now, it doesn't sound like an emergency, but he's really freaking me out. I feel like he might be thinking about robbing the store or something. All right, we're sending on it over right away. Please stay with me in case he becomes violent before the police arrives. After about 12 more minutes of waiting, the beautiful sound of tires on gravel inhabited my ears. The reflection of the store's harsh lighting gleamed across the police officer's vehicle. As I pulled in, it was truly a sight for sore eyes. I let out a satisfying sigh of relief. The police cautiously entered the store with their weapons drawn, pointed to the man across the store, and the police too are quite taken by the disturbing stillness of him. Are you all right? Asked one of the officers. We've got a call saying that you were unresponsive, and we thought maybe you needed some assistance. The man continued to remain completely still, again unscathed by a warm invitation for human interaction from yet another person. Sir. The officer continued. His attempts were again by the man's legendary cold shoulder. Okay, sir, I'm going to need you to put your hands up. Your actions are making everyone a little nervous, and the man in charge wants you out of here. Again, the man neglected to comply, and the officers swiftly placed the man in custody upon detainment. The man didn't flail around nor screamed in malevolent resistance. He simply turned his head and tried to maintain his concentrated glare on the freezer. The man's face was absolutely expressionless, and his eyes were quite hard. Really wouldn't be surprised if they were like that, because he hadn't blinked a single time since laying his eyes on the freezer. We're going to get you some help, buddy, said one of the officers as they calmly walked him out of the store. The other officer approached me at the counter. Did he say anything strange to you? Asked the policeman. Nah. He didn't say a single thing, man. It was pretty freaky. Hey, I get it. These are the kind of guys that makes us cops nervous, kid. You guys ever see anything like this, though? I wish I could say that wasn't the case. But the truth of the matter is, I see guys like this all the time. Anybody ever get you to mess with that meth? You punch him square in the mouth. You got that, kid. I've seen that crap turn guys like you into freaks like him in a matter of a week. This dirtbag comes in here again, tries to bother you. You just give us another call. All right, I gave a slight smile and nodded at the nice officer. Enjoy your evening, sir, said the policeman, and with that, the two officers pulled away from the Quick Stop, taking the psychotic druggie with them. I took another satisfying deep breath, now appreciating the absence of people within the store. The night crawled by with no other visitors, and I couldn't have been happier about that. Although nothing serious even happened, it was still an extremely strange, encounter that I would say was quite traumatizing. It had completely altered my thought process that night. And just before I was practically begging that someone would come into the store, after my experience with that Nuka set, though I was praying that I wouldn't have to interact with anyone else for the remainder of the night before work the next night. I collected myself. It was a freak occurrence, and nothing even happened anyways. So the man was spaced out on drugs. Like the cop said, it happens all the time. It just needed to go to work and appreciate the fact that I wasn't a copy. I'm glad I'm not the person called in to detain psychopaths like that. Besides, now I was stocked up on podcasts, and a friend had asked me to repair his lap for him. So I had plenty to keep me busy tonight. Regardless of what happened yesterday, I was expecting tonight to actually be pretty enjoyable. Arrived at the quick stop, had around 8:30. Meanwhile, usual time, and I got to work is at my friend's laptop on the counter, put on my podcast, and pulled up a seat. My friend was having some overheating issues, so I began to disassemble the laptop to get a better look at the cooling system inside. He always enjoyed jobs that requiring popping the computer open. Things were on the up and up here. I am getting paid for my clerk job and getting some additional money from my little computer repuzzle on the side, and I've got loads of podcasts to last them through the night. This was one of those nights. I thought I've got a pretty sweet setup here. Several hours later, with my face buried in the mess of computer parts, a not so familiar sound pulled me out of my trance. It was the electrical chime of the store's front door. It was a customer. The content of my favorite podcast had the potential to get quite explicit at times, so I quickly shot up and pressed the pause button to ensure I didn't. Customer. My eyes lazily transitioned from my iPod to the door to get a glance at the customer. A cold shiver shot through my body as my eyes connected with the shopper. It was the man from the night before. Ace expected him made Abeline to the freezers at the back of the store, but this time I skipped the attempts at conversation and trying to use my cell phone. I walked straight over to the store phone and dialed 911, trying to remain calm. I explained my situation to the operator, and again she sent over on it, and stayed on the line. The police arrived, and again the man ignored all commands and was wrestled to the floor by the officers. They arrested him and went on their way back to the police station. What the hell is going on? I thought to myself, what on earth could drive this man to acts? Oh, strangely, I was beginning to think that he wasn't just some drug addict whack. They don't do these kinds of things. They're so spaced out that they just run around aimlessly. This man had walked to the freezer in a very calculated, sensible fashion. It seemed that the man was being driven by some unseen force. I pushed on and completed yet another night with the creeps. 2 unpleasant visits in 2 nights. I was beginning to notice a theme, and I didn't like it. I called my boss to explain what was going on and asked for a few days off of work. My begging and pleading was met with a disappointed beat down about how I was just being a gishet. In so many words, I contemplated quitting work, but saying that out loud to myself sounded ridiculous. Was I really about to quit work because someone was acting out of the ordinary? I mean, sure, it gave me chills, but it hadn't done anything threatening to my health. So if God forbid me, he came in again, I would just call the police and know that for the rest of the night it couldn't bother me. Well, the next night, I show up to work around the normal time, and I get to work on my friend's laptop. The previous night's guest had really gotten me out of my groove, so I still had some work to do at this point. I was really more annoyed than I was scared. He was angry that I was letting this crazy jerk get him. I mean, also that my boss could be so inconsiderate. It tried not to dwell on it, though, and continued to listen to my abundant supply of entertainment. The store saw more visitors tonight than average, and every time I heard the sound of the door chime, I mentally prepared myself and turned my body towards the store phone like clockwork. About 4 hours into my shift, the starring psychopath walked into the store. Eyes await, made my way over to the store phone. As my hand hovered over the receiver, I began to think about it. I'm so tired of doing this every day. The cops come and the man keeps coming back. You know, what I'm going to give this a piece of my mind. I thought. I canceled my action and turned away from the phone to face the man. Hey, what's the point? Huh? Why do you got to keep coming back here? Not welcome in the store, Zara screamed, still on his way back to the store. The man stopped in his tracks. Yeah, that's right. I'm talking to you every night. You come in here and every night I throw you out, so what the hell is your problem? The man turned to face me. His face was washed of all color. Couldn't understand his facial expression, if I had to put any on it though I'd guess I'd say that he looked lost. After a few seconds of concentrated eye contact, I broke the silence. Well, Gundan, explain yourself. I don't know what to say, the man replied. He was actually surprised that he was capable of speaking, quite taken by his response. I lightened up at, look, Manny, you've been coming in here all week. You don't say nothing. You don't even move. I mean it, freaks, Metha. out. Quite honestly, I guess all I could say is that I'm sorry, he responded. I mean, you got some kind of mental problem. I mean, what's your fascination with that freezer? I hate to give such a beauty, you really wouldn't understand. Look, dude, I've been losing sleep over this. You just can't leave it. At that explain yourself, please, to work here. Okay, about 3 years ago. The man's focus, glare, and serious expressions left Meta's arm. There's a reason I don't work here anymore. Oh, what happened is shot back, someone was killed. Ignore that sounds bad on its own, but you really don't know the half of it. Dude, look at the store, it's empty, I have time, why don't you just tell me? The man let out a deep breath and ran his fingers through his hair. The place was like this, load always empty, rundown, crappy, and so it's a normal night. In working graveyard shift, a car pulls into the parking lot, and this girl hops out of the car. She was real pretty and had this spring in her step. You know, just this energy about her. It was bored out of my mind, and she looked really nice So I greeted her when she walked in. She said hello and smiled back at me. We chatted a little bit. She browsed. I remember us sharing a joke about the limited selection, cause the store didn't have the drink she came in for, and out of nowhere, I heard the door fly open and the place erupted in commotion. Chips flew off the shelves, packs of cigarettes from above fell over me, and the lights flickered in response to the violent tornado that was tearing through the store. The only sensation I could remember feeling wash heat from the gusts. My legs buckled and I crumbled, falling to my back behind the counter. I huddled myself into the fetal position and held on for dear life. Glass shattered, doors slammed, and the woman screamed louder than I thought they're capable of, and in an instant the tornado vanished. No gradual decline, I mean it, just disappeared as quickly as it came, like a bullet. I uncovered my head and opened my eyes. I thought I was blind, but the lights were broken. It was pitch dark. I got up to my knees, then to my feet, and reached into my pocket for my cell phone. I used the LSD as a flashlight to guide me to the phone and dialed 911. My ears were ringing so badly that I couldn't hear the dispatcher. We need help. We need help. I repeated over and over. It was solo stanza scaredy. Just didn't know what else to say. Hung up the phone and remembered the girl screaming. She wasn't making any kind of noise. Now the place was silent. I made my way over where she was. Her arms covered her face and she didn't appear to be breathing. Something about the way she laid there, obviously motionless, was just so powerful to me. I fell to my knees and began to breathe heavily and moved her arms out of the way and checked for a pulse. Maybe it was intense pounding from my own heart, but it felt something. She was still alive. I spoke to her, told her help was on the way, but she didn't respond. And when help arrived, they pronounced her dead. On arrival, explained what had happened, and needless to say, they were skeptical. I didn't even believe the words coming out of my mouth. The police explained to Meth that there weren't any tornadoes or other weather anomalies that night. What had just taken place simply couldn't be explained. And for a couple of days I was evaluated, not just physically, but also psychologically. I was really shaken up, but other than that, the doctors couldn't find any kind of psychological disorders. He was in good mental health considering the trauma that I had just experienced. The crime scene. Investigators found that the amount of damage done to the store was inconsistent with anything found possible for a person to have done. The woman had suffered fatal blunt force trauma to the back of her head from her collision with the door of the freezer, though she suffered no harm to the front of her body. That kind of scenario was only possible from a massive gust of wind, and so after just 1 day in jail, the detectives were forced to release me, quit my job here, and it tried to collect myself. It questioned the psychologist's evaluation. Days after the experience, I suffered from horrible nightmare, so couldn't get the image of her out of my head. I didn't know what happened, and I didn't know why it happened, but it broke me. Admitted myself to a mental health facility, and 3 years later, they deemed me fit to be released. But the nightmare had never gone away. 2 nights ago, I had a mental lapse that pulled me back here. It's like I was sleepwalking, napped out of it in the cop car, and I freaked out. I begged the officers to explain what was going on, and at the precinct they told me everything that happened. And then I remembered it all. I remembered getting out of bed, I remember getting in my car, and I remember pulling into the gas station. But when I remember to see it in the third person, they don't feel like my experiences. I'm not the one driving. It's like I'm sitting in the passenger seat watching myself drive. It doesn't feel like me. Something else is pulling me here. You don't know what the is. And I'm done trying to figure it out tonight. I break the cycle. The man reached for a pen on the counter and jammed it into his own throat. A stream of blood escaped as she yanked the pen from his neck repeatedly. He stabbed himself in and out, a collapse to the ground. Continuing to plunge the pen into himself, with each successive blow, his strength grew weaker and weaker. He sprung up and ran over to the man, ripped the pen from his possession and threw it across the store. He printed to the phone and dialed 911. He screamed at the operator that a man was straying. Tokil himself, before dropping the phone and running back to him, McNeil by his side and applied pressure to the wounds. Sarli didn't know what to do in a situation like this, but it felt compelled to do whatever it thought would help with each passing second. I could feel him losing life, and by the time I had arrived 10 minutes later, I had serious doubts that this man was still alive. Unfortunately, I was right. The man hadn't made it dead on arrival after explaining everything that had taken place that night to the police. They ordered me to leave the premises to allow for investigation and cleanup. He didn't complain because of the ruckus at the store. My boss and the property owner had showed up. It took the opportunity to quit right on the spot. Not while weeks' notice or anything after tonight. I was never setting foot in this place ever again. Call me crazy, but I believed every word of the man's story as insane. It was his edit with such conviction that there was simply no way. Couldn't believe him. He actually felt a deep sorrow down inside of me because I knew that the police were going to think that he was just another lunaticime. And that's what I'd thought of him before tonight. This place is crazy, Nothing. The fact that he stabbed himself in the throat, yielding to whatever inhabits this store, was all the evidence and needed to tell me. I shouldn't risk staying here. Another second I left. The quick stop that night never turned 2 years later, and I've looked back at tabs in the local news every day to see if anything out of the ordinary has taken place at the quick stop in just last week. Yet another unexplained death has